Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for coming back. We resume now our plenary session, and we begin with a bit of a challenge because, as you know, we were split, and we have both, for both separate sessions, I think we have like a handful of minutes to summarize the key points. So I would like to start on our side with our session on innovative business solutions for sustainable development. And since this is a particularly difficult task, I will delegate it right away to Gaurav Gupta, the moderator, who will make a short summary of the salient points, and then I can come in. Thanks a lot, Gaurav. You did just such a great job as a moderator. I'm sure you can cope with this.
Thank you, Frederick. The session we dealt with was what we have termed the fair and ethical market segment, which many of you will know as examples of fair trade, the global gap, a lot of the certification, but also the mainstream market and how it's choosing to be more ethical. It was a fascinating session, very energetic, and it was framed up front by a sentence saying that, you know, we've talked about volume, we've talked about value, and it's now time to also talk about values, because the trade can be civilized and uncivilized, as Rob pointed out, and it's important to bring values back into the discussion. Some important takeaways. It's not a niche market. It actually grew through the financial crisis and significantly. And what's important is that while the way it's narrowly defined, it's still a small market, it is actually having a huge impact on the mainstream market. So not everyone is being certified, but people are actually going out there and changing their practices, big businesses like Walmart, Nike, and so forth. So I think the takeaway is we must all watch this space. Some challenges. Does compliance really cost? In some senses, it doesn't actually cost, because we see, for example, the standards introduced by Global Gap, that there might be an increase in efficiency, higher price realization, and you of course cannot actually ignore your customer, and there is an increasing demand that's coming in from B2B and actually from consumers as well around compliance. So does it really cost? In the long term, the answer that was seen was it does not cost. However, transaction costs and the transition costs are very real things. There wasn't an easy solution offered on transaction costs, especially if you're geographically far away from some of the centers that do the certification. If you're an SME, how do you handle some of those transactional costs? And then transition costs. If you're a grower of cotton, to actually go from your current state to an organic state, that particular gap, which can take around three years, how do you bridge that? And there's a financing issue. And I think the way we can end that is to say, well, how can forums like ITC, how can trade facilitation organizations help? There's clearly a need to raise awareness. There is both in terms of consumers and actually some of the local businesses. There's a need to facilitate discussions in a multi-stakeholder environment at the local level. So to bring business in, to bring NGOs in, to bring in some of these certification bodies and have those discussions, which really needs to be driven bottom up. And then there is a need to potentially provide technical and perhaps financial help in the transition and transaction costs, because this is a market that is set to grow, and it is a market that has to grow, because as we've seen, the challenges that we face, that sustainable business models are actually the only way forward. So I think that's my summary.
Thanks a lot, Gaurav. Just perhaps the 2 or 3 points that we heard as suggestions for the International Trade Center and other institutions that work in the field of aid for trade. I think the first point is that complying with standards is and has to be seen as an investment by the producing companies. And I think what is key is that producing companies and the trade support institutions understand better what is in it. So I think there's a clear need to have case studies, to have more transparency, to have concrete best practice of what did a company gain by complying with the standard, how much improved market access, how much was the overall efficiency of production affected, and so on. So I think here is a clear invitation for ITC to strengthen its contribution that ITC is working on with the initiative of Trade for Sustainable Development, that is preparing and offering to the world a database with best practice, with case studies, with comparability of different standards. And we will be encouraged to work even harder on launching our standards map at the beginning of next year. This will also be important in order to understand from a consumer perspective what are the development benefits that different standards provide to the producers, so as to ensure that the premium that consumers pay really go down to the producers and are not absorbed in the chain. I think the second point you mentioned, the need to encourage a bottom-up, multi-stakeholder approach to ensuring that within developing countries there is the selection and the promotion of the best standards. I think there was one very interesting point in response to the question from the Pacific Islands. Now, what do we do with, in small island countries and other countries which have not yet really been able to participate as much as others? And I think the point that Flo was making is that there is a trend from universal standards to go more to specific, country-specific or geographic standards. And I think that's something we have to we can support, because I think that could be a move to integrate also communities and producers that are a bit further off. And the last very interesting point that was given as a challenge to the international community is to come up with a living wage for all countries, so that producers could adopt that on a voluntary basis. And I think we will have to go back to our books and see how this can happen. So those were really the major points. Thank you very much. And perhaps now we shift over to you, Megan.
Thank you, Friedrich, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Meg Jones. I'm the Women and Trade Advisor at the ITC. Our session got concrete, and let's get concrete about commercial transactions in the current climate. Commercial transactions in the current climate, and let's talk about where the growth is, where the growth market is. And the reason we have here on this podium the people from our session is because these people represent the future. The conclusion of our session was that to power trade, you need to empower women. To power trade, you need to empower women. And so what I'd like to do is just to present to you the visionaries of the future. So Minister Malahoo Fort from Jamaica expressed very clearly what Patricia Francis outlined at the very beginning. Government is responsible for export impact for good. Export impact for good means export not only for economic development, but with human development in mind as well. And she harkened back to Ban Ki-moon, the Secretary General of the United Nations Insights, when he said that empowering women has a multiplier effect in the economy. Good for economic development, good for human development. Mr. Lal shared with us the developments, how seriously the Indian government is taking this. He said they recognize that women are important to the economy in India. SMEs are the backbone of many economies around the world today. So the Indian government has taken this very seriously. In 2006, they did a baseline study on entrepreneurship. They looked at women's and men's ownership of companies in the Indian economy. And he said, although women own a smaller percentage of companies, they are the ones who employ disproportionate number of people. The message there is that if you want to grow jobs, you need to invest in the growth of women's enterprises. Now, how do you do that, and where's the opportunity? We had the procurement officer from Accenture. I think you heard Monique in the session this morning. Monique is responsible for a $250 million budget in the Asia-Pacific region alone. This is one multinational corporation. Now, what you have to think of is that's just one multinational corporation. 97% of Fortune 500 companies have a preferential procurement policy to source from women. This puts the ball back to you as representatives of government and trade promotion organizations, where you have to consider what are you doing to support the growth of women's businesses so that you can